Hello, and welcome to our third talk in our series on leadership in the church. Now, I've been on paternity leave for the last several weeks, so there's a bit of a gap between the last talk that I gave and this one. Go back and rewatch the first two if you need a refresher. Today, for this third talk, we're going to talk about deacons. There are two New Testament passages that I'm going to discuss. The first, Romans 16:1, is the only place in the New Testament in which a deacon is mentioned by name. The second passage, 1 Timothy 3:8-13, is the only place in the New Testament that provides any detail or guidance about what a deacon does and what sort of person should be selected for deacon. Perhaps I should begin with what the word deacon means. It comes from the Greek word diakonos, which simply means servant. And the meaning of diakonos has more to do with those he or she serves and less to do with the sort of work that he or she does. In other words, the diakonos is attached to a person or a group of persons more than she or he is attached to a particular set of tasks. There is a necessary personal element in the work of the diakonos. So to take this word and apply it to a person in the church, the diakonos is someone whose work is attached to the church as a whole, who serves the needs of the people there, and the service is largely to do with making sure that people's basic bodily needs are met, to ensure that those who are hungry are fed, and that those who are widows have a home and some money to live on, and so on. Although the word diakonos is used somewhat regularly in the New Testament to describe the literal servants in the household of a political or religious leader, the word diakonos is rarely discussed as an office in the church. Romans 16:1 is an exception. In this verse, Paul mentions in passing that Phoebe is a deacon in the church at Cenchreae. He does not explain what it means for Phoebe to be a deacon, although he seems to assume that his audience understands what this means. In the same chapter, Paul explains that Phoebe is delivering the letter to the Romans to the church in Rome. In the ancient world, the postal system was not as reliable as ours is, so you would send letters often with people you could trust. It seems possible that Paul mentions that Phoebe is a deacon in order to explain why he has sent the letter with her. In other words, she has credentials. She is a deacon and therefore trustworthy with such a task. All right, well, what does this mean? What is the significance of this? It means very simply that the first century church had at least one female deacon. That's something we know for a fact. On the other hand, we do not know of any men at all who were called a deacon. In other words, we have zero New Testament evidence that there were ever any male deacons. Of course, I'm not saying there weren't male deacons, but it's important for us to recognize right off the bat that we have more New Testament evidence for female deacons than we do for male deacons. As it turns out, writings from the 2nd century provide more evidence of female deacons, which means that most of the church probably continued to have female deacons throughout the 1st century. In this particular verse, Paul simply mentions that Phoebe is a deacon and provides no indication that this is strange or controversial in any way, which suggests that female deacons were considered normal by both Paul and by the church in Rome and probably elsewhere. Now we ought to bear this in mind as we turn to the next passage, 1 Timothy 3:8-13, which provides some advice on what sort of character a deacon should have. Deacons likewise must be serious, it says, not double-tongued, not indulging in much wine, not greedy for money. They must hold fast to the mystery of the faith with a clear conscience, and let them first be tested. Then, if they prove themselves blameless, let them serve as deacons. Women likewise must be serious, not slanderers, but temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be married only once, and let them manage their children and households well. For those who serve well as deacons gain a good standing for themselves and great boldness in the faith that is in Christ Jesus. Most of this passage is straightforward, but there are three words or phrases that can cause some confusion. The first is not indulging in much wine, verse 8. This does not mean that deacons cannot drink at all. The phrase deals with how and not whether deacons should drink alcohol. They can drink. In fact, in that historical moment, it was impossible really to avoid drinking alcohol. So they're allowed to drink, but they should not indulge in much wine. Why? Well, you can't make an alcoholic a deacon. Deacons were supposed to dispense church funds to widows and orphans, and you can't hand over money to the deacon if you're worried that the deacon might use it to run off and get drunk. Deacons were also needed for hands-on service, so they needed to be reliable. If the deacon is off on a bender, who is going to make sure that the widows and the orphans are fed? All right, second, what's this business about women in verse 11? As in, women likewise must be serious, and so on. There are three interpretive options. One, this is general advice thrown in the middle, randomly in the middle of a discussion about deacons. Two, this has to do with deacons' wives. The word for women and wife is the same word in Greek as it is in several other languages like French. Three, this has to do with female deacons. Now, the first option is a stretch, I think. Perhaps it is good advice for women in general, but it's also good advice for men, and it really makes very little sense for the author to put it here. The second and third options are more likely, and scholars have opted for both. Either way, there's nothing here that says women cannot be deacons. And the evidence from Romans 16 makes clear that women were deacons. Third, what is the meaning of let deacons be married only once? In Greek, it is more literally let deacons be husbands of one wife. There are two important points regarding the context of this passage. First, there were some in the early church who claimed that nobody should get married. Paul responds to this, for example, in 1 Corinthians 7, in which he says, it's better not to get married, sure, but it's also acceptable to get married. The point in this particular passage about deacons is that deacons do not have to be celibate. That's what this means in context. They may marry if they choose, but not more than one wife. To restate this phrase, its meaning seems to be, allow the deacons to be married, but do not allow them to be polygamists. The rest of this verse should be understood along these lines. Deacons, if they have a household and children, should manage them well. But it does not say they must have a household or children any more than it says they must have wives. We should also note that divorce is unmentioned in this passage. There's a word for divorce, and it is not used in this passage. What emerges from this passage? Those given responsibility in the church should be reliable. They should be responsible. Their conduct in family life should be irreproachable. They may be married. There should be a testing process. That seems to be the point of this passage in the context of the letter. But from what I can see, based on what the passage says, deacons may be female, they may be unmarried, they may be divorced, childless, convicts, occasional responsible consumers of alcohol, or all of the above, so long as they can do the work well, and so long as they live humble, holy, and scandal-free lives.